Hey guys, what's up? It's Portable. I welcome you back to another video focusing on the Switch 2 and its launch. As a personal note, really quick, it's been nice pushing out these simple discussion videos, but this one will be a little bit more in depth. These videos in large part have been inspired by Arlo/Topic Arlo for most of the Nintendo Switch 2 news that he has covered. And while I'm not trying to necessarily mimic him, I do want to go ahead and give him a shout out because I am blaming him for all of the research that I have done for this video in particular. So the main point of this video stems from a Bloomberg report that was written by Takahashi Mochizuki, who estimates that the Nintendo Switch 2 could sell close to 5 million consoles in the first week globally. So let's focus on something really quick here. This isn't a month, this isn't a financial quarter, this is a week. Now I want to preface that even though this is likely a professional opinion, this is still up in the air. Of course, we won't have any concrete final sales figures until the actual system comes out, and all of this could change drastically. What I will say though is that the global buzz surrounding Switch 2 does sort of support this, and even though if it might not happen in a week, I still think that definitely in the first quarter we will see it surpass every other Nintendo console. I would also like to preface that this news came to me through Nintendo Wire, which is a Nintendo focus news outlet. And if during this video I specifically mention things that Mochizuki went over in their own Bloomberg article, I kind of apologize on that front. I really don't want to pay for Bloomberg, and I didn't really get enough information from some of the other research that I've done about the article to try and piece things together. But with that out of the way, let's get into the meat and potatoes of this prediction. Starting off, prior to this article even being written on Bloomberg, President Furukawa made an official statement on the Nintendo Twitter saying that 2.2 million applications had come in for the My Nintendo store in Japan, and that they would not be able to meet that demand for this lottery/pre-order process. They did say that after the first drawing, that everybody who did put in for the first one would be transitioned into a second drawing, but then even after that, they still probably would not be able to fulfill the demand of everybody who put in a reservation. So let's focus on really quick how big of a number 2.2 million is. Even if some of the accounts that were registered to the My Nintendo store were either scalpers or bot accounts trying to get consoles, I still think that rounding down to 2 million is a huge number. But even then, with this argument, Nintendo's going to be selling the consoles, so what do they really care if it goes to scalpers or bots? Of course, they are trying to avoid any criticism as they've had that in the past for many of their systems, but in general, that's not something you can really stop. And unless I'm just running on assumptions and largely uneducated on the Japanese gaming market, I would have to imagine that this is not considering all of the retailers that would also regularly be stocking the Nintendo Switch 2 just like retailers would be in North America. So with this in mind, the fact that this is 2.2 million people trying to get in on a single storefront means that even if this was the peak, this is an incredibly impressive metric for a single market. Now to go down the rabbit hole of theory crafting, I do want to compare that 2.2 million that we were reported on to the Nintendo sales figures for many of the past consoles, starting from the Wii. And I would have liked to have gotten to the nitty gritty and focused on weekly and monthly sales figures, but these aren't really accurate if you just search the internet, so quarterly sales are what we're going to be going with for this portion. And they're pretty much just the most accurate sales numbers. So starting off with the Wii, it was released earliest on November 19th and reportedly sold 3.19 million units at the end of December 31st, 2006. This, as our starting point, is a pretty great base sales figure and actually excludes some of the markets that were included later on in 2007 and beyond, but for right now, again, we're focusing on the one that was as close to the launch, which was December 31st, 2006. Moving on, we do have the Wii U, which was released earliest on November 18th and reportedly sold 3.06 million units at the end of December 31st, 2012. And putting this into perspective, the Wii U had a wider global launch, excluding Brazil, and it couldn't manage to beat the sales of the original Wii. I can see why Nintendo expected this to be such a smash hit as it was the successor to the Wii, but they didn't really learn that generation as it continued, and of course history tells the story there. And of course, moving on to our final financial report for the Switch, it released in most major territories on March 3rd and reportedly sold 2.7 million units at the end of March 31st, 2017. Now, before you point out that the Switch had lower sales figures than both the Wii and the Wii U, there are a lot of factors to consider here. Firstly, the sales period lasted less than a month, which doesn't fairly match the Wii and Wii U's sale duration during launch. It's not graceful for me to make a generalized assumption on how much the Switch would have sold in that time frame, but I have to imagine it would have been more than the Wii U. But I think more importantly is that this console was not released during the holiday season, which is when gaming systems have their highest sales numbers during the year. So with these two factors being omitted from the Switch's first financial report, it's not surprising to see that this was a successful launch, even if the number at face value doesn't seem that way. And this is also a huge turnaround from the struggling sales of the Wii U. I understand that that was an odd side tangent, but to wrap around to the original point, the Switch 2 on day one could breach more than half of what each console sold in their first quarter, and that is for their global sales, and this is focused only on Japan. And if we want to go a step further and reference the physical sales of the Switch per year, Japan's total sales are usually less than Europe and the Americas. So that means that at bare minimum, the demand in each one of these, being generous, is at least 2 million. The potential of 6 million people wanting this console globally on day one is insane. And while all of this is speculation, one of the biggest things that we don't have to speculate about is how much Nintendo has prepared for this, because it will completely depend on how much they can meet this demand. For all we know, we could see something more akin to 4 million Switch 2 consoles sold in the first quarter if they haven't produced enough units. And just referencing another article, President Furukawa mentioned back in February 2025 of this year that they would want to increase production to meet the demand that would be anticipated for the Switch 2. But just the number in Japan alone has far exceeded their expectations. And so at the end of the day, Nintendo is responsible for meeting that demand. The ball is in their court, and it's up to them whether or not they make the Switch 2's launch a slam dunk. Regardless, I do expect the Nintendo Switch 2 to sell incredibly well. And of course, there's a lot of discourse right now still regarding the prices, but if you want my opinion, because the Nintendo Switch 2 is actually priced underneath the base consoles for their competitors, I don't think that it's going to perform any worse. You're still going to have people here and there who will either literally be priced out because it is expensive, or people who are boycotting the price because they want it to be brought down. But this is a premium piece of hardware, and if the United States pre-orders were any indication, this console is going to sell like hotcakes and may actually be hard to find within the first few months. So just to reiterate, will the Switch 2 reach 5 million units within the first week or even the first month? I think it's entirely possible, and it will completely depend on Nintendo meeting that demand. But to close this video out, I want to thank you all for watching. This is a crackpot theory that I hope makes sense with some of the evidence that I've produced. And to reiterate, I don't have any real financial background, so this isn't something that I can reasonably make an accurate statement on, and especially nobody should take my word as law, but I do think that there is a lot of evidence pointing to a very successful launch for the Switch 2. And with all that out of the way, thank you guys so very much for watching. Hopefully you're having a fantastic night or day wherever you may be, and I hope to see you next time.
See ya.